Though jump scares in movies are often criticised as lazy attempts to easily frighten viewers, in the gaming world they can be so much more visceral and effective due to a player's more active involvement in what's going on. There's just that immersive, far more affecting nature to spooky moments in games, especially when that jump scare isn't in a horror game at all. While some might still dismiss video game jump scares as low effort and uninspired, at their absolute best they nevertheless create moments that burrow themselves deep into the primal part of the player's brain, never to be forgotten. From decades-old horror classics to recent genre hits, these games prove just how versatile and effective jump scares continue to be. So let's switch the lights off, find your fanciest pair of headphones and ready your butts for the clenching, because my name is Rach and welcome back to WhatCulture Gaming. These are the 10 best jump scares in gaming history. Number 10. The Dogs. Resident Evil. In the eyes of many, the dog from the original Resident Evil is the quintessential video game jump scare, because it's an early example of a game's ability to have you frantically mashing the pause button and retreating into a corner of your room to just lie down for a few minutes or hours. Everyone hates playing this part of the game, and with damn good reason. More than 2 decades later, it's still a benchmark for jumps and arguably the most memorable gaming jump scare ever. Still, things have moved on a little bit since then, so we'll get this one out of the way early, but it's an absolute classic and it stays with you for life. Number 9. IRITHYLL Dungeons Ghosts. Dark Souls 3. If you've played through IRITHYLL Dungeons section of Dark Souls 3 while wearing headphones, there's a good chance that you then ended up in hospital with heart failure, and even if not, you might have been left with some lingering post-traumatic stress disorder. Shortly after entering the dungeon, you'll find a cell containing a dead body, and it's got a shiny on it, so of course you loot it. If you've played through this part of Dark Souls 3, you're surely triggered by the mere mention of that damn dungeon with its spooky witches and its spooky wretches and Umbasa help me. Number 8. SCARECROW'S Boat. Batman Arkham City. Coming as a result of you exploring the world and seeing what lies inside a rogue ship bouncing around the outside of Gotham's harbour, you'll find a man bound to a chair, alongside a number of art assets and accessories that point to Scarecrow's doing. Upon closer inspection, you'll need to zoom in and prepare. Oh god, he's still alive! He's still alive! Giving one hell of a scare! Mostly because you just don't expect it. Rocksteady would repeat this knack for making you leap out of your own skin during the Jim Gordon scene of Arkham Knight, but it's this dilapidated, roach-filled boat that takes the cake. Number 7. Locker Room. Silent Hill. The first Silent Hill might not have aged all that well, but its scares are still undeniably effective. There are several classics in the game. The first time you realise what the radio does, for one, and oddly enough, 2 jump scares involving lockers. The slightly tamer of the two involves a cat leaping out of a locker, but the best scare in the entire game sees the player examining a blood-soaked locker, which is shown to be empty. The loud noise of the locker opening combined with the ambiguously grotesque visual of whatever the butts that all was just makes this a surefire classic gaming jumper. Number 6. Man-Bat. Arkham Knight. An underrated part of the Batman Arkham series is just how effectively it uses the horror elements of the iconic hero's universe. Be it the strange morgue hallucinations in Asylum or the terrifying scarecrow barge in City, there's always a moment in these titles that manages to scare players silly. And the final game in Rocksteady's trilogy, Arkham Knight, is no different. In an attempt to make their world feel alive and believable, for the most part, the developers like to naturally let players stumble across side quests rather than having them pop up in a quest log out of nowhere. Unfortunately for players, that meant they only got to know about the Man-Bat's existence when he was right in their faces. Number 5. Marguerite. Resident Evil 7. It is fitting that arguably one of the best jump scares in gaming history takes full advantage of recent technological innovations, specifically the application of VR in horror games. Resident Evil 7 is an anxiety-inducing experience in VR even during its tamer sections. But there's one jump scare that is so stressful and just out of nowhere that it might just have you pulling the headset off your head and throwing it out the nearest window.
I told you to stay out of here!
The sequence is unpleasant enough played flat, but in VR it's straight up traumatic. Above every other jump scare on this list, there was no shame in screaming your lungs out here. Not to mention, the woman with the most bouff and minge in the entire history of gaming suddenly surprises you bursting through a window, a la Resident Evil's dogs. Honestly, please just get it away from me. Number 4, Ashley's Ghost, Until Dawn. Until Dawn is a much-loved homage of horror movies, cliches and all, and to that end, it's absolutely stocked to the brim with jump scares. While most of them can indeed be seen coming a mile off, there's one undeniably effective jump when the player has control of Ashley during Chapter 6. You could certainly call this jump cheap, but its bracing impact makes it worth it all the same. What's really annoying about this one, to me, is that the characters barely react to it. Heck, that happened to me, I'd be straight down that mountain going home. Number 3, T-Rex out of nowhere, Dino Crisis. Though less appreciated than the Resident Evil franchise, Dino Crisis is a cult classic survival horror game all the same, and it is affectionately referred to by fans as Resident Evil with dinosaurs. The game's scariest and most unforgettable moment of all occurs relatively early on, when after obtaining a keycard from a room with a conspicuously huge glass window, a T-Rex bursts its big ol' noggin through said window, eats the dead chap in the middle of the room, and then comes after you. Sure, the graphics look undeniably naff by modern standards and the music hasn't aged well, but the number of people scarred for life by this giant dinosaur attack is undeniable.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me.
Number 2. XENOMORPH in the Vents, Alien Isolation. Pro tip, if you see an ambiguous liquid dropping from a vent, don't walk towards it. That's what a lot of players quickly learned while playing this masterfully suspenseful Alien Isolation. Basically, just avoid entering or standing near vents in this game entirely unless absolutely necessary, because there is a good chance that you'll become xenomorph food otherwise. Granted, this isn't a single scripted moment of the game, but rather an emergent jump scare. But if you've played much of this game at all, you've probably encountered the pant-soiling screech of the Xeno regardless. Fingers crossed that this game gets a VR port in the near future. On second thought, for the sake of our collective sanity, perhaps not. Number 1, The Haunted Piano, Super Mario 64. Hey, you might not have been expecting to see a Nintendo game on this list, but Super Mario 64, when we were kids, introduced us to the most terrifying jump scare, and arguably the scariest enemy in any Mario game, besides that awful sun. Venture into Big Boo's haunt, a level found in a nice little garden outside Peach's castle, and be suddenly transported into a tiny pocket of pure horror, as Mario goes exploring the vast haunted house, full of ghosts and sentient eyeballs and demonic merry-go-rounds. In one room, as you are exploring, gathering red coins to be precise, you will see a large black piano. Even though it moves painfully slowly, it is the fear of knowing that unassuming piece of percussion is just sitting waiting to pounce on unaware plumbers that just makes us shudder as we remember it. And that's our list. Which of these gave you childhood nightmares at the time? And if we have missed any, be sure to add them in the comments below. My name has been Rach. You can follow me on Twitter if you like at Don't Rage Quit. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Have an awesome day. Boo!